Good morning, global changemakers. My name is Joaquin Sinvictres. I am the Senior Youth Regional Program Manager for the ADB Youth for Asia Initiative Bank. As the host mentioned, I currently am an Isaac alumnus been part of ISEC for 8 years, and it's a pleasure to be here to speak with you on really an important topic that surrounds a lot of young people, not only in Singapore, but within Asia and the Pacific, and that's on youth employment. So thank you again to ISEC in Singapore for including ADB Youth for Asia in your Career Care event. So here at Youth for Asia, we work with young people to find ways on how young people can be integrated and be involved within development processes. And one area of development for young people here in Asia and the Pacific is on employment and the future of work. So today I'll be sharing with you some of the work that ADB has been doing to address the current youth employment gap within the region as a result of the ongoing COVID-19 challenges. But I'd first like to share a bit more about what we do here at the Youth for Asia Initiative in the Asian Development Bank and why we do what we do. So Youth for Asia is a youth-led team inside the bank, which specializes in creating and supporting meaningful spaces. ADB recognizes that young people have unique skills that they must leverage to solve today's challenges. These skills involve having an innovative mindset, digital literacy, adaptive capacity, resilience, and collaboration, just to name a few. And the earlier keynote alluded strongly to some of these characteristics. So there is a growing consensus on the kinds of value add that young people bring in the workplace and how we as young people need to make sure that we are able to bring these qualities as we transition into the workplace. So within Youth for Asia and how we operate on a day-to-day basis is within the context of 3 key operational activities. One is on voice, which is advocating for change in communities at a policy level by co-leading development campaigns and influencing youth-led development practices. And that's in the form of, let's say, events, such as today. Another area where we try to include young people within the bank and within Asia Pacific's development processes is through insight. And that's how can we generate more knowledge about young people through research and evaluation to deepen the bank and the region's understanding of youth insights from a uniquely youth perspective. So currently there's actually a gap between the knowledge that people generally know about young people and most of the investments are just about, let's say, adult populations and not necessarily about youth populations. So Youth for Asia comes in and tries to provide more insight and research that's really focused on young people. And last one is on action, and that's young people co-leading and co-designing projects within the bank and implementing them as well through different means. And the idea here is how can young people not only just design the projects, but be part of the implementation process of these things. So we believe that when discussing youth jobs and the future of work here in our economies, young people need to be at the table. Youth inclusion is the first step. Learning by doing, having a fair say in the policies and programs that will ultimately impact all our lives. But we know that intergenerational collaboration is challenging. Meaningful youth engagement is a skill, and it is one that we are committed to mastering and to sharing with all of you. So YFA was actually established in 2013, and we have implemented a number of youth-led projects that were planned, co-designed, and implemented by young leaders like yourselves. And our projects are hinged on the concepts of meaningful youth engagement, and many do include components of youth economic empowerment, which is essentially the ability to provide young people with more employment opportunities as a result of these projects. So I'd like to actually share a quick video that really explains more about some of the work that we've done in the past.
while there are many headlines about Asia and the Pacific's aging population, it's actually the most youthful region in the world, with the need to empower young people in the region meaningfully clearly identified. The Youth for Asia initiative was founded in 2013 by the Asian Development Bank with the mission of enabling governments to collaborate with young minds to develop the Asia and the Pacific of their dreams. So how does Youth for Asia support young people to contribute to solving financing and governance challenges on water-related issues on the ground? We promote youth-leading cross-generational and multi-stakeholders approaches across development projects in Asia and the Pacific. And it is also our role to leverage funding sources from ADB to pilot and collect evidence to build a stronger case about how young people can be partners for a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia and the Pacific. Our first experience was with the Coral Triangle Initiative across 3 island countries, including the Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, and Timor-Leste. Through the trainer activities in marine resource management, young people empower local citizens to be active contributors in their communities. Participant leaders organize monthly community cleanups, appointed conservation committees, and develop management plans for the conservation sites after the training. Learning from the success of the Coral Triangle Initiative, the next youth-led pilot and demonstration under the Bagmati River Basic Improvement Project between ADB and Nepal government aims to bring evidence that how young people can lead the cross-sectoral and multi-stakeholder approach for community engagement to tackle 3R principles of reduce, reuse, and recycle waste. Young people have a chance to host dialogues with their national and local government representatives, sharing their vision and action for the future of the Bagmati River. And with the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, the pilot is also testing the effectiveness of hosting community engagement activities virtually. Last but not least, we are also working with the local city government in Chilean City, People's Republic of China, on the ADB project about ecological improvement in Songhua River to encourage young entrepreneurs to create green solutions to improve the environment and also the livelihood in the area. The chosen innovative solutions will be further supported financially by the government. And additionally, young people will have the chance to interact with their communities and promote sustainable living and practices for the Songhua River. From all our past experience and research, here's what we found out about young people, which might be very interesting for you. Young people are digital geeks. Young people are innovative and disruptive thinkers. Young people are caring and responsible citizens. Young people is a resilient and resourceful generation. We are natural collaborators and we are behavioral influencers. And what young people can offer that to bring insights, where we call it the generation of knowledge and research. We bring voices where we lead advocacy for creating sustainable change. And we bring action where we co-design and implement and evaluate development activities. Most importantly, we should not work alone. We need to work with you and with different generations. Building cross-generational partnerships is a must to enable active and meaningful contributions of young people for sustainable development progress.
Perfect. So that was actually Min, who's one of our youth project designers and also former ISIC member from Vietnam. And we actually just finished our Bagmati River project. So we are just wrapping that up. So it really shows that despite the pandemic and despite just the disruption and uncertainty that's happening around us, we are still able to pursue youth-led projects within the bank. So 2020 marks the 5th year of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, the launch of the SDG agenda. And we are 10 years away from 2030, when that is where the deadline of the goals are. And yet we're in the midst of facing a global phenomenon that really took the world by storm, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. Young people, especially those who are in high-risk industries in education and training, are more vulnerable in these changing times. And the International Labour Organization, or ILO, worked with ADB to conduct a joint research on the impacts of the pandemic on youth employment. So you can see on the slide here is just a brief link that it's more so like a light reading for you for the weekend, but just to give you guys a more in-depth context of the report you can access. And last October, we actually launched this report, and I'd like to share with you another video of some of the key results that we discussed and we presented from the study, and that really shows the impact of the pandemic on young people across Asia and the Pacific.
Collaboration with the International Labour Organization. The team on our side from ERCD and SCCC from NGOC, led by Chris Morris, are the ones who led this work. So we'll hear from the authors of the report. And as you can imagine, young people were impacted perhaps even disproportionately by the pandemic. Even before the crisis, it was already a tough labor market for our youth. But now it has gotten much worse. And they will highlight the three main channels. One is about sort of disruption in earnings and hours, work. Second is about ability to go to school and get training that has also been disrupted. And the third is about school to work transition.
What we've done, and I think Samir mentioned this in the beginning, is we tried to look at this aspect and look at the different aspects of the way that youth are being impacted by the crisis, and we have the three there. So certainly job disruptions, including reduced working hours, reduced earnings, and outright reduced employment. Of course, reduced earnings are very much related to reduced working hours. If you're working less time, you're getting less money, but also for people who are own account workers or working in the informal economy, less demand for their services means less income. The second dimension is disruptions in education and training. And we've had a lot of discussions at ADB over the last couple of months about education and training, the closure of schools, the closure of colleges and universities, and efforts to shift to digital education and e-learning. We won't talk much about it, but that's certainly an important element or dimension of the crisis for young people. The third element is thinking about school to work transitions. There are a lot of young people out there who are finishing school or have finished school in the last 6 months, and they're trying to make that transition to the job market. And there's severely, they're doing it at a severely unfortunate period of time where there's a pandemic and there's a very, very weak labor market. Next slide, please. What we did in the report is we tried to identify the sectors of the economy that are being hardest hit or will be hardest hit by the pandemic. And out of a range of 17 sectors, these were the 4 that came out as the most important or the most hardest hit by the pandemic. Now, what we then did is we looked at youth workers and their concentration or their distribution among the various sectors. And we found that 1 in 2 youth, or about 47%, were engaged in one of these 4 sectors. And that was slightly but significantly higher than for adults, in which it was about 39%. So their youth are traditionally working in sectors which are now being hard hit by the pandemic, and that can't help but affect them in terms of maintaining employment and so on. Next slide, please. Again, as I said in the beginning, we take youth as an identity group, but of course we have to layer this with other dimensions of identity and who people are, and gender is certainly a very important element of that. I didn't talk a lot about the gender aspect in the pre-crisis analysis, but we certainly see it coming out. What we found is that young women tend to be overrepresented in 3 of the 4 hardest hit sectors, and particularly the hospitality sector. Now, what does that mean, overrepresented? Well, it means that generally women account for about 35% of young workers. The other 65% are male. Okay, and if you take that 35% and then you look at these specific sectors, you'll find that in 3 of these 4 sectors, women account for more than 35% of the workers in those sectors. So they're slightly overrepresented from their total employment distribution, and that tends to be being hit by those sectors. Women are highly represented in education, of course, and the education sector is being hit, of course, but that's what we know. They're also very much involved in the health and social care sectors, and that has a dual side to it. On the one hand, health is creating demand for workers, obviously, because it's a health pandemic. On the other side, we have a lot of women in the front lines being exposed to COVID, and that's creating a health risk. The final point on that slide I'd just like to mention is that women do a lot of work in the house. Because of lockdowns and quarantines, a lot more family members are home, children are not at school, husbands are not at work, and women have to take care of the household. They do take care of households, and they're spending a lot more time doing that. So they've got that extra burden as a result of COVID. Next slide, please. We have some statistics on working hour losses, but I'm just, in the interest of time, I'm just going to skip this slide. Next slide, please. What we did is we did some projections on youth employment for 2020, and we looked at what the rates were in 2019 and what we think they might be in 2020. And there you can see, in many cases, the rate of youth unemployment is likely to double that of the rate in 2019. And we estimated between 10 and 15 million young people could lose their jobs, or that's full-time job equivalents, across 13 countries in 2020. Next slide, please. We also looked a little bit at young entrepreneurs, and young entrepreneurs are people who are not employed, but they create employment, they're running businesses, and they're also being hit. And there's a number of studies out there, although we didn't analyze data specifically ourselves. Youth, the interesting flip side of this is that a lot of youth-headed entrepreneurs or enterprises are being very creative and trying to adapt to the new situation with new strategies, new models, and so on. Next slide, please. Finally, we looked a little bit at the school to work transition. And as I said, people are trying to enter the job market because they spent their time in school, they've got their diplomas, their degrees, and they're just, unfortunately, they don't have the jobs. The jobs are simply not there, and they're struggling with that. That's a major problem also that people have to deal with, both financially and both from a mental health point of view.
Great. So that was just a snapshot of what the launch event looked like. It was an hour-long event with really just more data information, but this is, I felt like this excerpt really just showed kind of just like the meat of the report. But in essence, what are the key things that we as young people need to take away from this report? One is it is a challenging time for everyone, especially for young people. As you can see there, the pandemic has had significant ripple effects to the employment potential and the employment opportunities that currently exist for young people. So there is a threat in creating a lockdown generation. And so it's good that we have this report in place, because it really highlights that we need to do something in order to avoid creating a lockdown generation for young people. As the presentation alluded earlier, youth unemployment is on the rise. But in order to address these two issues, we need to have targeted responses, whether it's through the government side, through private sector, but the responses need to be very specific depending on which country or which region you're a part of. And second is, what the report really highlights is that we really cannot let young people be left behind in terms of these COVID employment responses, because studies have shown that by bringing young people into the workforce and empowering young people does contribute to a positive economic cycle. And so we really need to make sure that as young people, we keep our government officials or the private sector accountable to really make sure that when they roll out these response initiatives with regards to youth employment in COVID, young people are part of that, and young people are included in those response packages. So within Youth for Asia, and this is more so from the research side, we also wanted to capture the voice side, like really, how are young people really feeling on the ground, and what are the different actors within the region really saying about the role that young people play in employment, but also the future of employment given the current situation. So what Youth for Asia has done is that we've actually designed a virtual space for more young people within the region and other stakeholders to meaningfully engage in issues related to quality jobs. And so last August 12th, during International Youth Day, we embarked on a month-long online event called the Asia Pacific Youth Symposium, or APYS. We had over 1,000 participants that joined from across the Asia and the Pacific, and over 10,000 people tuned in through their social media channels. But the gist of the event was essentially making sure that we are able to gather a cross-generational and cross-sectoral response towards jobs and of course meaningfully youth engagement. And we did use different participatory approaches given that it was online. One particular approach that we actually used is this concept called appreciative inquiry, or AI. The approach doesn't ask what's the problem. Most of the time when we tackle issues, we always find the problem, or when we always find like the root cause. But we kind of flipped the script a bit and actually identified what were the strengths, what were the opportunities that were there, really looking at it in a more positive light. So really one of the questions that we asked was really, what are the strengths that young people currently possess that work towards a shared future for the region? And so appreciative intelligence aims to bring out the best in us by asking uplifting questions, emphasizing our strengths, and really focusing on our solutions. And at the very core of this process is really about searching for opportunities to make positive change in organizations. And it is trying to change mindsets and perspectives and to create a more holistic approach of the world we live in. And through that, the participants feel greater ownership and positivity towards the preferred feature that they've envisioned. And the key here is really focusing on the possibilities to give premium on what works. And our theme was really strongly related to youth employment and a decent work agenda. And so perhaps this could be something that you can take as, moving forward and really assessing your career paths, is really maybe thinking it from a more positive perspective in terms of really rather than looking at your weaknesses and identifying what are the threats, but really looking at what strengths you currently possess, and what future do you really envision for yourself in employment, in your career, given the current situation. So I'd like to show another quick video of what really transpired during the event.
This is the Asia Pacific Youth Symposium, a social dialogue platform that convenes governments, young leaders, and other stakeholders to discuss how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting young people's jobs and employment prospects, and what this means for the future of work.
There is a need to focus on policies that stimulates job and employment opportunities, and particularly on demand side, not just giving the job, but actually creating the job.
If we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and leave no one behind, it really cannot be achieved unless we fulfill the rights and welfare of all people with disabilities.
Welcome everybody to a crash course on meaningful youth engagement and youth economic empowerment.
The best way to ensure that a solution is relevant and has genuine and lasting impact is to not only closely involve those who will be affected, but to actually have them lead that process and be empowered with decision-making roles.
To overcome these deep systemic challenges, we need to develop youth economic empowerment solutions. Meaningful youth engagement unlocks youth power, which young people can then leverage to address structural barriers that have previously impeded their participation in the world of work.
Welcome to the launch of the APYS consultations. We've had 3 knowledge sessions where we listened to young people and experts across government, NGOs, civil society, etc., and they made it very clear the future of the Asia Pacific, and in fact the world, hinges on the capacity of young people to fulfill their jobs and livelihoods and aspirations. We're going to identify emerging opportunities and build knowledge and skills. We're also going to facilitate cross-generational, multi-stakeholder dialogues to try and strengthen meaningful youth engagement practice. And lastly, creating pathways towards a better future where youth are economically empowered.
By and large, I would say the outlook towards technology is that it is going to be seamless, it's going to be more integrated, and it's going to be a new norm where it's no longer a choice, but a requirement.
I note that we are opening up, we are building a world where we are more thoughtful of that. We need to reach a point that it is absolutely equal.
What we see today is shrinking spaces for civic society, for young people to really participate, to have a say in different policies, facilitating that kind of meaningful engagement, because it's really building that intergenerational dialogue.
So I wanted to share a bit more about like the outputs that we had in the event, because perhaps this could be helpful for you guys to really identify like your own career pathways, and especially if you are looking for careers in particular economies. And we did focus on 3 particular economies: the digital economy, the informal economy, and the green economy. So within the digital economy, some of the recommendations that we had from the event showed that new jobs need to be created through platforms such as more support for startup systems by widening access to startup financing, especially for small companies focusing on environment sustainability, and strengthening the overall startup ecosystem by accelerating innovative financing initiatives. Also, we are in this age of big data, and so we do call for nurturing more professionals in the cybersecurity space to prevent digital disruption, and developing cross-sector data protection policies and regulations. And lastly, is in terms of democratizing artificial intelligence, and that's really demystifying AI through dialogue, education, and services, and developing AI roadmaps at the national level. And of course, this would allow us to really meet the demand for employment, and that's being able to equip the future workforce with digital skills, and also reskilling talents for emerging jobs in the post-COVID economy. So this is basically the pathway that young people, as well as actually different actors from civil society, government, private sector shared and kind of identified like these are the future types of jobs that we're looking at and future opportunities that really young people have and can grasp over the next few years. Within the green economy, we identified 4 particular pathways. One is skills for sustainability. And so how can we provide low-cost education and training for green jobs? Because right now, when you think of green jobs, it is quite, things tend to be a little bit more expensive, especially when it comes to buying greener products, etc. Another one is really how can we also green our educational systems? How can we actually embed these qualities of sustainability within the education systems that we have around the region? Another pathway is green innovation fund support. So job creation related to sustainable tourism, policy, education, innovation, start having startups and entrepreneurs working for the green economy. continuing this intergenerational conversation through apprenticeship opportunities. How can we build mentorship programs where young people can learn from adults in terms of maybe current work and being able to bring and improve current work systems, and also youth and local government collaboration. And finally, beginning a green jobs revolution, and that's through encouraging rural livelihoods, and increasing the number of young green entrepreneurs. So again, within the green economy, these are just some examples of potential career paths that young people envision in the future, and types of future jobs that we envision in the future. And lastly, when it comes to the informal economy, there are three particular pathways. One is making sure that there is wide open access for all by having early career guidance, and that should definitely be embedded in within the educational system, and improving the school to work transition. Another is having an upskilling and reskilling culture. So this thought of constant improvement of skills, and that's through agile and continuous learning. How can we bring that into schools? How can we bring that into the workplaces that we are currently in, and recognizing transferable skills? And lastly, making sure that there's a fair shot for everyone. And that means inclusive recruitment drives and job creation for vulnerable youth. So when in ADB, we are involving young people in research that affect their lives, as evidenced by the paper that we just presented with ILO, we also work across generations to identify solutions. And Youth for Asia is committed to continuing the cross-generational dialogue within a diverse group of stakeholders focused on driving this youth economic empowerment agenda forward. And this is an iterative process, and that's why we're here today as well, because we want to invite you to take part in our journey as well. We will be sharing more resources and future opportunities of engagement in the coming months, and I do hope that these were useful for you today. And if you'd like to talk more about how you can engage young people in policymaking, research and learning, design, etc., please, you could reach to us out directly through, as you can see here, our social media handles, and particularly our email, youthforasia@adb.org. But before I open up to questions, again, I just wanted to thank Isaac and Tigirpa for the opportunity for having ADB Youth for Asia speak at Career Care 2020. I wish you all continued success in expanding the voice, insights, and actions of young people to contribute to the achievement of the SDGs. But again, thank you so much. And I'll yield the floor to you guys, the participants.
All right, thank you so much. All right, before I move on to Q&A, I would like to give me a moment to share screen. All right, so there is a Q&A platform available on the chat box. So please type in any questions you may have under the Q&A tab. If your question has already been posted by someone else, you can just upvote the question as well, and we will address the questions after the presentation has been finished, which is now. So we already have one question. So the first question by Levon is, since ADB is after all a bank, do you find yourself having to justify the financial returns before being able to support any youth project?
Great question. That is correct. Fundamentally, I mean, we're not just like a bank, like a normal financial institution. Like, we are called a bank because we do support different development activities on the ground. But yes, that's right. Every time we propose a youth project, we need to we use what's called a monitoring and evaluation framework, especially those who were in ISIC or are in ISIC, particularly in the global volunteer sector. You're probably very familiar with that, but it really shows like how does the money, let's say, transfer to the desired impacts that we want for the project. So every time we pitch a project, we need to make sure that we actually are able to present those. And while the project is happening, we make sure there is someone dedicated to monitor the progress of the project.
All right, thank you so much. So keep sending in the questions if you guys have any. And so I actually had a personal question. So in your opinion, as a youth, I'm currently in undergraduate university as well. So in your current opinion, what would you suggest is like the first step for people like youths like me who are just starting out their undergraduate career and then further going on to the postgraduates? What would you suggest is our first steps that we are prepared for this kind of situation in the future as well, and also how to just start in general?
Mm-hmm. I would say the first thing, I mean, I had an initial answer before, but now that COVID's happened, I have a different answer. My initial answer was to, just to really know what you really want. But because of COVID, I think young people need to be more comfortable embracing uncertainty. I think we're so used to things being there and instant and ready that we sometimes have an expectation that, when we graduate from university, immediately get a job. And that's not necessarily the case. And so things such as COVID really throw a curveball in terms of our own personal ambitions and our career ambitions. So it's really about when you go out there, really embracing uncertainty. And when, let's say, a rejection, and I always say this, a rejection doesn't mean that your dreams, your ambitions, it stopped. It's just a redirection. Maybe there's another pathway that is meant for you or you'd like to pursue. And so always come out there with multiple options and really identifying okay, if plan A doesn't work, what's plan B? Being willing and ready to pivot essentially is very important nowadays.
All right, thank you so much. We have one more question. Tenzar asked if we have mentioned the different economies, example, digital, etc. Some youth study more specialized courses, example, medicine, dentistry, etc., as compared to more social sciences, which is more general. How would such youth handle the situation if they can no longer work in the sector that they're trained for?
That's a very good question. And it's quite challenging because there was a report recently that showed that by 2050, a majority of the jobs would have been created that that never existed currently. So they're completely new jobs. And so, our education could definitely take us as far as possible, but we as young people need to be ready to reskill ourselves and to upskill ourselves. And so we always need to find time, even if there's no more time sometimes, for us to, maybe try and learn a new skill. Like, for example, if you're not really good at coding, maybe that's something that you should probably try to learn, because that's going to be the future. Or if it's a particular platform, or if it's a particular transferable skill. What's really important at the end of the day is employers really don't necessarily see the academic background. So even if you're an engineer, you could go to consulting. You don't have to have had a business background. It's more about the transferable skills. And so how do you create a portfolio of transferable skills? And so that's probably one of the key takeaways that I have for the young people out there is identify in your experience in university, what were the transferable skills that you gained and how can you actually bring that to the workplace? Because those are, I think, are probably more essential and more important nowadays. And I do think we have those, like us being able to fully communicate virtually. That's a different type of, intergenerational communication skills that we develop, or us being able to, switch, let's say, platforms quite easily, and so that digital literacy. And so those things are transferable. And so really identify what are the transferable skills that you have, because I think those are the ones that will take you further in your career.
All right, thank you so much. Would you have any personal anecdotes from your youth days as to how you would be able to grasp such transferable skills, actually?
So youth days, I'm still youth until next year. So, but it's still a learning process for me. But I think one thing that what I've learned is every time I actually switch to a new role or new position, and every time I interview, I always take the time to actually review back and identify what were the highlights and low points of the experience that I had. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have had a job. Like, when I started as well, trying to find jobs or trying to find internships, I actually looked back at my extracurricular activities, like whether it was, managing a team or being part of an event. And so it's always good to actually do kind of like a review before you do an interview to identify what were some examples. One of the things that I've learned was the STAR example, identifying the situation that you were a part of. What was the task? What was the action? What was the result? And simply doing that STAR method in every experience that you had, and actually documenting it, that's very helpful for you to identify what transferable skills you actually gained through each experience that you were a part of.
All right, thank you. Let's see, do we have any more? Do you think the education systems around the world are equipping youths for these upcoming jobs, the ones that don't exist yet, with these transferable skills?
good question, and that's actually one of the things that we're trying to work with one of our partners at the Asia School of Business. Is they built kind of like the zero to makerspace wherein they implant these I would say mini classrooms in high schools for just people, young people, students, high school students, just play around and see if they can develop something from scratch. And so I don't think educational systems are doing enough, and that's why we have institutions like the ADB to really help push policy, but also projects to show that that the education system needs to evolve a bit. But there are really good examples of I would say more developed educational systems wherein that's been the case. But I think generally it's not there, and so we need, I think, educational systems around the world need to find ways to constantly adapt and evolve their curriculum to make sure that it is relevant for young people, and that will enable young people to easily transition into the workforce.
Thank you. So for all these, so as you mentioned before, that ADB exists and the Youth for Asia exists, so that it's like kind of like a bit of a support system for these education systems who are a little bit lacking. So in the perspective of any youth, any undergraduate or just graduated guy and girl, what would you, how would you suggest that? Because I think the perspective that they have is they just go in, they get their degree, do their co-curricular activities on the side, and then go on to the workforce. I think you've mentioned this before, like it's just a streamlined path. How would you suggest that we sort of broaden our horizon and like look at the different opportunities around us? And yeah, how do you suggest that?
I would definitely say like always try to find an element of discomfort. So you're right. Nowadays, young people, I think, they're just so multifaceted. Like before, I think I was part of that trend. I'm dating myself, but I feel like I'm part of this generation where like half of the people in my cohort weren't super active in school, and then half were. But then I feel now young people, even as early as high school, are just like doing these amazing things. And so young people are so multifaceted. It doesn't mean like we're competing against each other. It's just a matter of how it's your biggest competitor is yourself. So always think that, one. And two is that when you go through your process, like each person has their own pathway. Like there's no kind of like one correct pathway to achieving the dream career you want. There's multiple pathways. And so, but a good way for you to really gauge whether you are on the right pathway is that ability of discomfort. If you don't feel challenged at all in what you're doing, then that's probably a red flag, because that means then you're really not doing, but you're not giving it like 100%. You're really not stretching yourself enough. Like you're just kind of comfortable where you are. And so it's good to be part of experiences, whether it's going back to school after maybe a few years at work, or maybe switching to a completely different industry as soon as you graduate, to find ways where you can constantly challenge yourself. Because the more that you are able to stretch yourself, you'll be amazed to see how much capabilities you actually have and possess. And how much potential you have. And so I definitely would say try to make sure that there's always a percentage of discomfort and a percentage that you feel challenged. But I also wouldn't recommend being completely challenged all the time, because it's going to burn you out. And so you need to find the right balance. So obviously still do things that you're comfortable doing, but you need to always leave room for things that you're not comfortable to do.
So actually, I have a lot of friends who have like started their own companies, and like it doesn't have to be like big like Amazon, Google level companies, but even smaller ones who they sell this and that, and they actually make some side income while they are in the time in university. So these are just like one or two ways where people can actually kind of help to like, it's kind of like an employment, I'd say. So. Would you feel that the whole social media and digital economy aspect really helps the youth employment sector? And also, do you have any advice for people who want to take this step and don't really have the confidence to do so? Like, what would you suggest that they do?
Completely. I think the digital economy is so huge, and that's why that was one of the focuses that we had in our event, is because it's moving to that direction essentially. Like, I mean, currently now we're doing things on a virtual platform, and actually there is a growing trend of not only young people but people in general that are that are actually having these side hustles or side jobs. Actually, I was reading another article the other day, and well, I'm from Canada, and so in Canada, 30% of people in general actually have a second job. Whether it's like they sell something on the side, or like, you know, they have their own mini consulting boutique firm that they have, and so it's normal. And for young people, you need to. The thing here is like you're not going to know if you don't try. And so I've never met anyone that is incompetent or not skilled. It's just a matter of like them not really properly honing that skill. But in order to do that, you actually have to take the first step. Like you need to actually, whether it's, and I've seen a friend that she just opened her a Facebook page about tutoring, because, and she has a job, a full-time job, but she's doing it on the side just so that, you know, it's maybe something she does on the weekends, but maybe it's because it's something that she also loves to do. And so you need to take the first step, whether it's like opening another Instagram account, because it's so easy for you to build your own business, opening another Facebook account, etc. And so because it's just so easy, it's just within a click of a button. And it's definitely easier nowadays because as long as you have the tools, like the proper internet, and you know, computer space, then you technically are able to build those businesses. So I would definitely suggest, you know, just taking the plunge. Fail fast, fail hard, because that's the only way that you'll know if you're developing, if you're learning further. And really, like, the worst thing that really could happen is that you succeed. That's what I always say. Because if you don't try, you're really never gonna know.
So it's kind of like, don't be too surprised if you don't fail. But if you do, you know, if you do fail, but if you don't fail, that's always a pleasant surprise. It's always
like there's really no, especially nowadays when I think the opportunity costs really aren't that big. Especially like, I mean, things are kind of like, it's free to open a Twitter, or an Instagram account or a Facebook account. Where I think before, you know, you'd need to go through, you know, a bigger kind of like set of bureaucracy, or even put a little bit more bigger investments. And so sometimes even small investments, like, you know, whether it's like opening your own baking business because, you know, maybe you're passionate about baking or cooking over the weekends. That's the best thing, is really, there's really no bad job. It's just really how you approach the job. So any job is of value, and so I think definitely take the first plunge.
All right, we have one more question coming in. So for those who don't want to start their own businesses, for those who are searching for jobs, do you feel that employers are open to employing youths, especially during COVID, since there's a large amount of employee number restrictions?
Good question. I'd like to believe that the tide is turning. Like, I don't think we're in the reality yet when like everyone's like, oh my God, you're a young person, you're hired. I think that the tide is turning. I think definitely a few years back, I think companies are more conservative when it comes to really hiring young people, and they do require a lot of experience. But I think with COVID, I think that definitely changes things, because of the fact that COVID really push companies to be more reliant on technology and the online space. They realize that they fail. Like, if their employees aren't of a certain market, like young people, then they're not going to be able to thrive and survive. And so I think we're turning the tide into having employers realize the value of recruiting young people. Although I would definitely say, like, it is still a challenge, and especially for young people that are in vulnerable and underdeveloped conditions. Like, so how do we make sure that those young people are also provided those opportunities? Because that, and I think the report does show that, is that it's those groups that would be left behind more. So I would say, like, yes, employers are slowly tiding, the tide is shifting, but I think we need to be faster in making sure that young people are already kind of like included in their hiring policies, or it's, you know, they have youth programs, like young professional programs, for example.
Absolutely. I think one, even in Singapore, is very, very prevalent to see youths who go to lower income jobs, as in stuff that pays $7 to $8 to $9 an hour, because they are like so desperate for a job, because they need to feed their family, they need to keep things going, and sometimes their parents are not as well to do, and they are unable to work as hard as they possibly can as compared to other families. And as a result, the youth themselves, the children, the kids, they have to enter workforce and enter like F&B or like very tiresome, low wage jobs, I'd say. So this was especially prevalent in COVID when we were all in lockdown and only the essential workers could come out, and it was really, really difficult for people to sustain. And touch wood, something like this, if it ever happens again, hopefully I hope it doesn't, but how would you suggest that people kind of get ready or prepare themselves for this, especially like the low income people?
Good question. I think for the lower income people, we need to make sure that the responses that we do now are done right, and because the report highlights that, so it's there, meaning we need to make sure that how governments respond, how private sector responds, how maybe even civil society responds to creating employment for everyone is there, and it's right from the get-go. Because it's kind of like before it was kind of like shamey once, like we before like previous responses ignored young people, and I think and kind of people forgave people about that. But now that it's like, okay, like there's reports already that show that young people are most vulnerable, that they're most affected. There's really no area, there's no room for them to just miss young people. But I do think, though, for the lower income individuals, it is important as well that we include, and on top of these employment opportunities, really the right tools for them to properly manage their finances. So the right financial literacy skills, because you're right, like sometimes you do get a very small amount, and that goes immediately to your day-to-day needs, and so there's really nothing left. And so that the problem with that one is you're kind of just really living paycheck to paycheck. So we need to find a way where we do also educate young people and just people in general that are in these low income livelihoods, to make sure that they are equipped with the financial literacy skills, so that they are able to set something aside again for another rainy day. Because again, like I feel at this point, really anything could happen in the future. And so, things are just so unpredictable. And so we need to make sure that we're prepared for that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I have one last question for you before we move on. Youths are a complex and heterogeneous community and situated in multifaceted backgrounds. How are youths different among the Asia countries or even with each country? And how does ADB adapt and navigate those differences to empower all youths, especially those most vulnerable?
Oh, very good question again. Oh, you guys have answered very good questions. Thanks so much for your participation in this discussion. And actually, I'm enjoying it thoroughly. And that, so to actually address the question, that's the notion of the Youth Economic Empowerment Initiative that we have. Is the main goal is to not provide one solution. And that's the same that the ILO paper shows, is we need targeted solutions, we need country-specific solutions. Because if you go to Singapore, you guys have a different issue, like when it comes to youth employment. But if you go to like Cambodia, it's completely different. If you go to like Indonesia, it's completely different. So we need to make sure that the solutions that we create are localized within each country, because each country has their own realities, each country has their own demographics of young people. And so how ADB really adapts to that is how we operate is we do have experts that are regionally based. So we for example, we have a health expert, and they're not the health expert for the whole Asia. Like we have a health expert for, let's say, Southeast Asia, one for, let's say, South Asia. And so that allows us to really provide that targeted approach. And second is what's unique about ADB, or what's unique about, I guess, multilateral development institutions, is that the governments are our biggest stakeholder. So really we respond to the government's needs and requests for based on their policy. And so that's why we are able to create really specific and targeted projects, because it is based on what the government needs at that point in time. And so if you explore the ADB ecosystem, you'll see that there are government-specific projects. We also have like regional projects that cover multiple countries, but most of the projects that we actually do are country specific. So that really allows us to provide really those targeted solutions that the paper alluded to, and that is what really is needed.
Really, that was really interesting. Thank you so much. All right, that was our last question. Thank you so much, Joaquim.
Thank you.
Really learned a lot. You can check out the social media and if you want to connect with Youth for Asia. And yeah, we'll now be moving on to the feedback form. Thank you so much.